The slap that broke the silence. Ruth Daniels had learned to disappear in plain sight. Every morning, before the sun even kissed the edge of the Atlanta skyline, she tied her thick black curls into a tight bun, buttoned up the starched white uniform that itched against her skin, and stepped into the mansion like she had for the past 11 years. The Bishop estate was all polished marble, silk rugs, and expensive silence. Senator Franklin Bishop, a rising political giant, prided himself on running his household like he ran his campaign, clean, disciplined, and without question. And Ruth, the housekeeper who became the housemaid who eventually became the full-time help, knew that silence kept the machine running. She worked quietly, made the senator's coffee without sugar, but with 2 cubes of ice, folded Mrs. Bishop's pale pink scarves exactly in half, and never let her own voice rise above a whisper. She had done this job through 2 elections, 3 scandals, a pandemic, and a personal divorce. She had raised her son Marcus while scrubbing floors and laundering secrets. She had endured the whispers, the slurs disguised as jokes, the pitying glances, and the way people, even other staff, looked past her like she was just a shadow passing through their perfect lives. But she never imagined that it would be a single dinner party, one moment, that would shatter everything. That night, the air was thick with heat and pressure. A dozen political donors gathered in the Bishop Mansion's dining hall. Crystal wine glasses shimmered under chandeliers, the table dressed in gold-rimmed plates, and the quiet tension of Southern wealth. Ruth moved silently between the guests, refilling wine and clearing plates. She didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then she kept her voice flat and polite. She had learned long ago that emotions were dangerous in rooms like this. She was leaning down to retrieve an empty platter when it happened. The senator, already 3 glasses into his bourbon, turned sharply. "Ruth, where's the damn foie gras? I said it should have been served before the veal." His voice boomed across the room, but she didn't flinch. She simply nodded and moved toward the kitchen. That's when she heard a sharp whisper from one of the guests. An older woman with a bejeweled necklace that caught the light like a snake's glare. These people never get it right. Too busy counting tips to understand order of service. The table chuckled softly, and Ruth felt the sting behind her ears, but she kept walking. She had walked through worse. But as she returned with the platter, placing it delicately on the table, Senator Bishop turned and whispered, "Next time, think faster. I'm not paying you to move like molasses." Ruth inhaled slowly. She didn't respond. But something in her eyes must have shifted because the senator suddenly stood up, reached across the side of her face, and slapped her. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Ruth stumbled back, hitting the corner of the sideboard. A wine glass shattered on the floor beside her. Her hand rose slowly to her cheek. The pain was sharp, hot. But the silence that followed, that was worse. No one moved. No one said a word. Someone cleared their throat. Another guest took a sip of wine, eyes lowered. A woman to Ruth's right turned her face away, pretending to fix her earring. Ruth stood there, her ears ringing, her heart pounding in her chest. The senator sneered. "Don't ever embarrass me again. Clean this up before the next course." Then he sat down, just like that. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She knelt to pick up the glass shards, her hands shaking, her breath shallow. The blood from a small cut on her palm mixed with the spilled wine on the floor, red on red. She knew every eye in the room had seen it, but they had all agreed silently to pretend it didn't happen. By the time she finished wiping the floor, her apron was stained, her pride cracked, and something deep inside her had snapped. She walked into the kitchen and placed the bloodied rag in the bin. She didn't speak to the chef, who kept his back turned. She didn't speak to Carla, the younger server who looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Ruth just walked down the back hallway, past the laundry room, into the tiny staff closet where they kept their belongings. She pulled out her bag, sat on the warm bench, and took a deep breath. Inside her purse, tucked beneath her notebook and emergency Band-Aids, was the small pen camera her son Marcus had gifted her last Christmas. "Just in case," he had said. "People like them don't think anyone's watching." Ruth had chuckled then, thinking it was overcautious. But tonight she had worn it, not for them, but to document the pay cuts the senator had ordered. In secret, docking the staff wages while raising campaign spending. She never expected to capture this. Her hand trembled as she pulled out her phone, connected to the pen's Wi-Fi, and played the footage back. The video was clear. Her face, his slap, the table, the silence, the laughter, the shame. She watched it once. Then she watched it again. Then she uploaded it to the cloud. Ruth didn't go home that night. She took a cab to her sister's house across town and asked to stay the night. She didn't explain. Just kissed her sleeping niece's forehead, sat on the couch and stared at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly overhead. Her cheek still ached, but the pain felt distant, like it belonged to another version of her. At 3:47 a.m., she opened her phone and typed a caption. "This is how they treat us, in silence, in wealth, in power. But not anymore." Then she uploaded the footage to a private email address, one that belonged to an old friend who now worked as a journalist for a small Atlanta outlet. She didn't post it to social media. Not yet. She needed to be sure. She needed to be safe. But in that moment, something irreversible had already begun. By sunrise, the video had been viewed over 100 times within the newsroom. By 10 a.m., it had been fact-checked, confirmed, and scheduled for a 6 p.m. public release. At 10:15 a.m., Ruth got the first call from the senator's assistant. "Ruth, we need to talk." He didn't mean it like that. "Maybe we can settle this privately." At 10:30, she got the second call from a lawyer she didn't know, offering to represent her pro bono. And by noon, a van from Channel 4 had parked in front of the Bishop estate, asking questions no one wanted to answer. But Ruth wasn't at the mansion anymore. She was at Marcus's school, sitting across from the principal, explaining why she would need to take her son out for the week. She didn't cry. She didn't falter. She only said, "I need to keep him safe for a few days. The news will make it hard for him." The principal nodded, lips tight, eyes filled with questions. Marcus didn't ask any. As they walked out of the building together, hand in hand, he looked up and said, "You did it, didn't you?" "You're not scared anymore," Ruth smiled faintly. "I'm still scared, baby, but I'm not silent." And somewhere across the city, as the footage finished rendering, the countdown to 6 p.m. began ticking down. The slap had already happened. The silence had already been broken. What came next would not be private, it would be public, it would be loud. And this time, it would not be ignored. The world starts WATCHING. The clock struck 6 p.m., and with a quiet click, the truth went live. The video wasn't uploaded to some noisy gossip blog or flashy scandal site. It first appeared on the front page of the Atlanta Mirror, a respected digital news outlet known for its local integrity. The headline was simple but powerful. Senator Franklin Bishop caught on camera slapping black maid during donor dinner. Underneath, the video began to autoplay. No ads, no distractions, just 31 seconds of raw, uninterrupted footage. No soundbite, no spin, the senator's hand flying across Ruth's cheek. The way she staggered, the guests pretending not to see, the unbearable silence that followed. And then the close-up, Ruth kneeling on the floor to clean the mess, her dignity shattered, her hand trembling but steady. The article attached gave context. Her name, her 11 years of service, her clean employment record. The hush-hush paid deductions, the quiet warnings. The confirmation that the video was authenticated and untouched. The internet moved quickly. Within 15 minutes, the clip had been shared over 10,000 times across Twitter, Facebook, and local forums. By 6:45, hashtags began trending. Hashtag Justice for Ruth. Hashtag Silent No More. Hashtag Bishop Exposed. By 7:10, the senator's press team had gone into full lockdown. Phones at his campaign headquarters rang without pause, most of them unanswered. Reporters surrounded the Bishop estate, camped near the gate like wolves circling a wounded animal. His security guards tried to push them back, but the narrative had already escaped. It belonged to the people now. Ruth sat on her sister's living room floor, knees tucked under her, phone buzzing endlessly beside her, but she didn't touch it. Her son Marcus lay on the couch beside her, headphones on, trying to pretend the world wasn't changing outside their door. Her sister Denise paced the kitchen like a storm cloud. "Ruth, you know this can't be undone. You sure you want to go all the way with this?" Ruth didn't answer immediately. Her fingers traced the old wood grain on the coffee table. She thought of all the years she'd bent her back so others could sit comfortably, all the time she'd swallowed her voice. "Yes," she said finally, her voice low but strong. "I've been invisible long enough." The next morning, Atlanta woke up different. News vans blocked traffic in Midtown. Political commentators clashed on live TV. Some called it career-ending. Others called it a misunderstanding. But the footage couldn't be debated. It was real. It was clear. It was brutal. Some right-wing outlets tried to spin it, said maybe Ruth had provoked it, sighed maybe she had stolen something. But others, louder, clearer voices, defended her. Journalists, workers, mothers, people who knew what it meant to suffer quietly. As small protests downtown. Dozens of restaurant workers gathered with homemade signs. "Respect the help. My mother is a maid too." Ruth stood up for U.S. None of them had ever met her, but they chanted her name like she was one of their own. And she was. Meanwhile, Senator Franklin Bishop was nowhere to be seen. His campaign office released a vague statement. "We are reviewing the footage and will issue a full response soon." Senator Bishop remains committed to his constituents. It landed like a wet paper towel on fire. No one cared. The people had already made up their minds. The footage was shared on national news that night, CNN, MSNBC, even BBC World News. Ruth's face, her silence, her fall, her rise. People didn't just see a maid, they saw their mother, their sister, their neighbor, their past. In the law office in downtown Atlanta, Ruth sat across from a woman named Amira Layton, a civil rights attorney with eyes sharp as steel and a calm that came from knowing exactly how powerful truth could be when it was sharpened into evidence. "You have the video, the witnesses, the record," Amira said, tapping her pen against the thick folder. "We're not just filing assault. We're going after defamation, unlawful termination, hostile work environment, and wage theft. This is bigger than one slap." Ruth nodded, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I don't want money," she said. "I want change." Amira smiled. "Then let's make some noise." Ruth's phone didn't stop. Media wanted interviews. Activists wanted statements. Lawyers wanted to represent her. But she didn't say yes to anyone. Not yet. She needed space. She needed breath. She needed to think. And most of all, she needed to remember who she was before the cameras came. She walked down Auburn Avenue that afternoon, past the mural of John Lewis, past the old barber shops and corner stores, her footsteps echoing on the sidewalk like someone reclaiming the ground beneath her. A few people recognized her. A woman with graying braids nodded and whispered, "Keep going, baby." A young man in a hoodie raised his fist. A boy on a skateboard said, "My mama's praying for you." Ruth said thank you over and over. Again, her voice low, her spine straight, not broken. Not anymore. That evening, as Marcus finished his homework and Denise cooked collard greens in the kitchen, Ruth stepped onto the back porch. The sky was pink and purple, the kind of sunset you didn't see unless you were really looking. She sat in the old rocking chair, pulled out her notebook, and wrote slowly across the top of the page, "Day 2, the world is watching, but I'm still here." Across the city, the Bishop campaign was unraveling. Interns whispered behind closed doors. His wife, Clarissa, had left the estate that morning without a word, her ring still sitting on the bathroom sink. His financial backers began calling him directly, asking questions he couldn't answer. And inside his office, Franklin Bishop stared at the paused frame on his laptop, Ruth's face just before the slap landed. Calm, dignified, real. He hadn't expected the world to care. He had expected silence like always. But silence had betrayed him. Meanwhile, Ruth prepared for her first public appearance. Not a rally, not a speech. Just a town hall hosted by a local church. The pastor had invited her to speak, saying, You don't need to say much, Sister Daniels. Just stand in your truth. She agreed. She wore a simple blue dress, the same one she had worn to Marcus's graduation the year before. Her shoes were scuffed, her hands were dry. But her heart was steady. That night she stood at the pulpit, the stained glass behind her glowing red and gold. The pews were full, workers, students, mothers, activists, strangers. The silence before she spoke was deep and still. Then she took a breath, looked out at the sea of eyes, and said, I am not just a maid. I am a mother. I am a worker. I am a woman, and I am tired of being treated like furniture in someone else's house. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. She continued, her voice clear, not loud, but unshakable. He hit me, yes, but what hurt more was the silence. Not from his hand, from the people who watched and did nothing. From a world that says, people like me don't matter? Well, I do matter, and I will not be invisible anymore. The applause was slow at first, then it grew, then it became thunder. She stood there still, her eyes glistening, her chest rising with every breath she didn't have to hide anymore. Later, as people came up to hug her, thank her, share their own stories, Ruth felt something she hadn't felt in years, seen and far away. In rooms of polished glass and cold air, the rich and powerful began to whisper new questions, not about how to silence her, but how to survive what she had started, because Ruth Daniels, the black maid they slapped, had just spoken, and now the world was listening. The system pushes back the morning after the town hall. Atlanta didn't feel like the same city. Overnight, Ruth Daniels had gone from the maid in the video to something more dangerous to those in power, a voice they couldn't control. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't cursed. She had simply told the truth, and that truth had become a wildfire. The local news stations ran the clip of her speech on repeat. Her words, I am not furniture, were being quoted in classrooms, churches, and even city council meetings. Even her old co-workers at the Bishop Mansion, many of whom had once kept their distance, were now reaching out in secret, whispering about what they had seen over the years, asking if they could help. And yet Ruth knew, as did her attorney, that when a black woman dared to rise in a world built to keep her down, the system didn't just watch. It fought back. Began subtly. A whisper campaign, planted through the media like invisible ink. Anonymous tips sent to reporters claiming that Ruth had been written up multiple times for being difficult, though no such documents existed in her file. An unidentified source told a national outlet that she once threatened a coworker with a mop, an incident that never happened. Online forums filled with comments questioning her motives. She's just doing this for money. Probably trying to take down a good man to get famous. Why didn't she quit if it was so bad? At first, Ruth ignored them. She stayed, focused on her legal meetings, her son, her community. But when a major newspaper printed a piece calling her story complicated and suggested there may be more than one side, she realized the system wasn't just resisting. It was trying to erase her again, in a different way. That week, Amira, her attorney, called her into the office with a look Ruth hadn't seen before. Not fear, not doubt, but a steady kind of readiness. They're preparing to countersue. You? Amira said flatly, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were documents leaked from the Bishop legal team. They're going to claim that you violated your confidentiality agreement by sharing the footage. They're also going to argue emotional distress, that your accusations caused irreparable damage to Senator Bishop's reputation. Ruth didn't flinch. His slap caused damage to my face. Amira nodded. I know, and we're ready. But you should know, this won't get easier from here. They're going to dig through your past, your divorce, your son's school record, your old debts. They'll try to make you look like a mess so the public stops seeing your truth. That night, Ruth sat at her sister's kitchen table long after everyone had gone to bed. The dishes were washed, the lights turned low, and her notebook lay open in front of her, a clean page staring back. Her hands hovered over the pen, trembling slightly. She had always believed that standing up would feel like breaking free. But now she understood it felt more like standing in the middle of a storm. Alone, with lightning above and the ground shaking beneath you. She picked up the pen anyway. At the top of the page she wrote, "Day 3, the system fights dirtier than a slap, but I'm still here." The next day brought more pressure. A group of high-profile donors pulled out from Bishop's campaign. But in a twist, several powerful conservative voices came to his defense. They framed him as a victim of cancel culture, a man punished for one mistake. They tried to paint Ruth as part of a political smear campaign. One television host even suggested that her lawyer was a radical trying to bring down men in power. Ruth watched the segment in silence, her son sitting beside her. Marcus looked up at her, confused. "Why are they lying about you?" She looked down at him and said, "Because people who hold power will do anything to keep it, even lie, even attack people like me, because they think we'll run." Then she looked him in the eye. "But I'm not running, baby. I'm standing." And, stand she did? That weekend, Ruth received an invitation to speak at a women's labor rights summit in Atlanta. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't used to stages, microphones, or public attention, but Amira encouraged her. "Every time you speak, more people come forward. You're not just helping yourself anymore. You're opening the door for others." Ruth agreed. She stood at the podium in a small community center packed with janitors, bus drivers, hotel workers, nurses, and kitchen staff. Many of them black, many of them women. She didn't use a speech. She spoke from her gut. "I wasn't born brave," she said. "I was born tired, tired of being quiet, tired of pretending. Tired of wiping messes I didn't make while being treated like I didn't matter. But one night when he slapped me, I realized silence wouldn't protect me, so I stood. And standing doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you speak anyway." The crowd rose to their feet, some with tears in their eyes, some with fists in the air. Ruth wasn't just a maid anymore, she was a movement. But back in the polished towers of downtown, the Bishop legal team prepared their next attack. They found a photo of Ruth from 10 years ago, taken at a house party in college. She was laughing, holding a drink. They circulated it to media, hoping to paint her as reckless, unprofessional, not the kind of woman you'd trust. It was desperate, it was dirty. But some outlets still bit. "Who is the real Ruth Daniels?" one headline asked. But this time, something different happened. A wave of people, especially black women, pushed back online. She's allowed to have a life. She's allowed to party 10 years ago and still be a victim of abuse. Stop weaponizing our joy. Ruth watched the messages roll in with quiet gratitude, strangers defending her, voices rising with hers. And then came a surprise. Her former coworker Olivia reached out. Olivia had once worked with Ruth at the Bishop estate, but quit after just 3 months. "I left because of how he talked to me," Olivia said during a quiet call. "He never touched me, but the way he looked at me spoke to me. I felt unsafe, and I never said anything. Until now," Ruth thanked her. "Would you testify?" "If this goes to trial?" Olivia paused, then said, "Yes, I think it's time." Momentum built again. A second video surfaced, this time of Senator Bishop yelling at a young Hispanic groundskeeper over spilled fertilizer. It wasn't as shocking as the slap, but it added fuel. The image of a powerful white man abusing workers of color, again and again, was hard to ignore. The press began circling tighter. Investigations into Bishop's businesses expanded. Ethics committees raised questions. Rumors swirled that his campaign manager might resign. But inside Ruth's home, it wasn't about politics. It was about survival. Bills still needed paying. Groceries still needed buying. And her son still needed help with homework. One night, as she folded laundry, Marcus asked, "Do you wish it never happened?" She paused, a sock in one hand. "No," she said softly. "I wish it never had to happen, but now that it has, I'm not going back to silence. Not ever." And, across town, Senator Bishop sat alone in his office. His campaign had been paused, his wife had moved out, his lawyers were struggling to keep up. And on his desk sat a printed copy of Ruth's first public statement. He read it again and again and again, the words ringing louder than any protest. I am not furniture. Because now even he couldn't unhear her. He couldn't silence what had already echoed across the country. And Ruth? She wasn't stopping, because every lie they tried to build was falling apart in the face of her truth, and the system, so used to swallowing people like her whole, was starting to choke on its own cruelty. The fire that followed the days that followed weren't calm. They didn't offer rest. Ruth Daniels found herself in the eye of something she hadn't asked for, hadn't chased, but now had to carry like a torch. Her name was on lips far beyond Atlanta. News anchors debated her truth like it was an abstract theory instead of a bruised reality. Her face appeared on morning shows beside words like bravery, controversy, courage, chaos. Some described her as the new Rosa Parks. Others called her just another disgruntled worker. And yet, despite the noise, Ruth walked through it all with the same quiet power that had once kept her invisible, except now the world could see her. And it couldn't look away. One morning, Ruth received a letter, not an email. A real letter. Handwritten in crooked cursive, no return address. She opened it slowly at her kitchen table. Inside were just a few words. You're stirring up hate. Black maids belong where they're told. No signature, no name. Just venom on paper. She stared at it for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't show Marcus. But later, when her attorney Amira called, she mentioned it. It's begun, Amira said, her voice colder than usual. You need to understand something, Ruth. People like him, powerful men who are losing control, they don't go quietly. They don't just retreat, they lash out. And when they do, they don't just aim at you, they aim at everyone around you. That night, Ruth lay awake staring at the ceiling. The house was still, except for Marcus's soft breathing down the hall and the hum of the old air conditioning unit in the window. She thought about her own mother, a maid too, one who had scrubbed hotel bathtubs for 30 years and never once raised her voice to a manager. Even when they touched her shoulder without permission or threw tips on the floor like she was a stray dog, her mother never reported anything. She had simply said, "We survive, baby. That's our power." But now Ruth wondered, what if survival wasn't enough? What if survival was no longer the goal? What if transformation was? The Bishop campaign was crumbling faster than anyone expected. His PR manager resigned quietly. His press secretary disappeared without comment. And then came the moment no one predicted. Clarissa Bishop, his wife of 18 years, released a statement. In a public interview with a local station, she said calmly, "I watched the video. I know what it looks like. And I've seen things over the years that I can't ignore anymore. I believe Ruth, and I'm not standing beside him anymore," the nation gasped. A political wife breaking ranks wasn't new, but this wasn't just about politics. This was about a man who had used his power to control others for years. And the dominoes were falling fast. The same day, Ruth was invited to a private meeting with Senator Evelyn Hart, a prominent black congresswoman known for her fiery speeches and zero tolerance for injustice. The meeting was quiet, no press. No microphones, just two women sitting across from each other in a small room at the local NAACP office. Evelyn didn't ask Ruth how she was feeling. She didn't offer pity. She just said, "You've lit a fire, and I want to help fan it." Ruth blinked. "I didn't ask for this?" Evelyn leaned forward. "None of us do. Harriet didn't. Rosa didn't. Fanny didn't. But we carry it anyway, not because we want it, but because we must." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were proposed legislation drafts, worker protections, whistleblower expansions, mandatory body cameras in private campaign residences that used public funds. "I want your name on this," Evelyn said. "Your story is the reason." That night, Ruth sat in her living room flipping through the papers. It all felt too big, too sudden, like she had climbed a staircase without realizing how high it had gone. She had come from a broken marriage, missed rent and double shifts. She had spent most of her adult life saying, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir." And now a senator wanted her to shape laws. She looked over at Marcus, sitting at the table, drawing quietly. She watched him color a face, brown, curly-haired, smiling, and label it, "My mom." Strong. Ruth's throat tightened. She didn't feel strong, but maybe strength wasn't about how she felt. Maybe it was about what she did next. Then came the fire. 3 nights later, the Bishop campaign headquarters caught fire. Investigators called it suspicious. No one was inside at the time, but the blaze was caught on nearby security footage, a hooded figure throwing a bottle through a window. Some believed it was a protester. Others believed it was staged, a distraction to draw attention away from the legal unraveling. But the narrative shifted. Senator Bishop's team immediately tried to paint themselves as victims. "We've been under attack," his new lawyer said on television. "Senator Bishop has received threats." His family is frightened. "This isn't justice, it's a witch hunt." But Ruth didn't respond. She watched from afar. She knew this game. They were trying to twist the narrative, shift the focus, make it about fear, not about truth. And it worked for a moment. Polls began to show a slight uptick in Bishop's support. Conservative networks clutched the fire as proof of lawlessness. They even tried to link Ruth to it, pointing out that her cousin had once posted angry tweets about burning it all down. But Amira was prepared. She held a press conference the next day with facts, timelines, witnesses, and calm confidence. "My client is not responsible for the fire," she said clearly. "But she is responsible for the heat." The room went silent. Because when you hold a mirror to abuse, the abuser doesn't just see their reflection. They see what they've built, and sometimes they burn it down themselves. As the investigation deepened, more voices came forward. Former employees, past interns, house staff, all with stories. All echoing Ruth's. One young woman, barely 22, recounted how Senator Bishop had cornered her in his study after a donor gala. She had been too scared to speak then. But now she had Ruth's voice in her ear. And she wasn't silent anymore. That week, Ruth returned to her old neighborhood. She hadn't been back in months. It was smaller than she remembered. More cracked sidewalks and peeling paint. But it held memories. She walked past the corner store where she used to buy ice cream for Marcus after school. Past the church her mother once cleaned on Saturdays. Past the apartments where she had first learned to stretch $10 across 5 days. And on a corner wall, someone had painted a mural. Her face, not a glamorous version, just her, plain, strong, tired, but steady. Underneath were the words. She spoke, we heard, tears filled her eyes. Not for the honor, but for the truth of it. For all the years no one had heard her, and now they did. That night Ruth wrote in her notebook again. The pen moved slower now. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. Like each word mattered more than before. Day 4, fire can burn, but it can also light the way. She closed the book, took a deep breath, and looked out the window toward the city, toward the noise, toward the fire. It hadn't consumed her. It had revealed her. And now it was time to keep walking, because once truth is spoken, once dignity is reclaimed, once the world starts listening, you don't go back to silence. You become the voice that won't stop echoing. The trial that changed EVRYTHING the courtroom wasn't grand. It didn't have golden chandeliers or sweeping marble floors. It smelled faintly of paper, pine-scented cleaning fluid, and nerves. But for Ruth Daniels, it was the most important room she had ever walked into. She sat at the plaintiff's table beside Amira, her attorney, dressed in a navy blue suit she had borrowed from a friend and shoes that pinched slightly at the toe. Her palms were damp, but her spine was straight. Across from her in the defense chair sat Franklin Bishop, still sharp in a tailored gray suit, but noticeably thinner, his jaw tighter, the bags under his eyes heavier than the last time she had seen him. He didn't look at her, not once. His new legal team surrounded him, shuffling papers and whispering strategies. But Ruth didn't watch them. She kept her eyes forward, breathing deeply, reminding herself with each inhale that she belonged here, that this wasn't a favor someone had granted her. This was justice she had fought for. The courtroom filled fast. Reporters lined the back benches. Activists from the workers' rights groups took seats beside students, hotel maids, grocery clerks, Every day, people who had followed her story and showed up not for spectacle, but solidarity. Marcus sat with her sister Denise in the second row, his face calm but his grip on Denise's hand firm. When the judge finally entered, a stern black woman in her 50s named Judge Althea Monroe, the room fell into reverent silence. She didn't smile, she didn't nod. She simply said, "Let's proceed." Opening statements came first. Bishop's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Clay Wentworth, stood with the practiced ease of someone used to winning. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "what happened that evening was unfortunate. Emotions were high, timing was off. But we must remember, this is not a case of violence. This is a case of ambition, media manipulation, and opportunism. Miss Daniels was a disgruntled employee who violated trust, confidentiality, and chose to smear a public servant in the heat of political season." He went on, smooth as glass, painting Ruth as the orchestrator of chaos, someone who used a tiny camera for revenge, not justice. Someone who saw a slap as a golden ticket. When he sat down, a murmur rippled across the courtroom. Amira rose, slowly adjusted her glasses, and walked to the center of the floor. Her voice didn't thunder, it pierced. "My client worked 11 years in silence. She folded napkins you'll never use, scrubbed floors you'll never walk on, watched others eat while she served. And when she was slapped, humiliated, in front of donors, she did not fight back. She didn't scream. She didn't raise her hands. She picked up a towel and cleaned the mess he made. And when no one else spoke, she did." The room held its breath. This case is not about ambition. It is about dignity. It is about truth. And it is about how, even now, in 2025, a black woman can be hit in a room full of power and still be called the problem. The prosecution called their first witness, Sheila Myers, a server who had worked under Ruth and had been present the night of the incident. Sheila stepped into the witness box with her hair pulled back and her voice steady. She described the night with precision. The guests, the meal, the silence. She described the slap, the sound, the way no one stood. "I wanted to speak up," she said, "but I was scared. We all were." Her voice cracked only once. "I watched her fall, and I did nothing. I won't make that mistake again." The jury listened, stone-faced. Bishop shifted in his seat. Next came Olivia, the former maid who had left after 3 months. She testified about the culture inside the house, the whispered insults, the casual racism, the way staff were treated like shadows. And then came footage. Not just the original video, but additional security footage obtained from the campaign's kitchen corridor. It showed Bishop, an hour after the incident, laughing with donors as if nothing had happened. One guest even mimicked the slap with a chuckle. The courtroom watched in stunned silence. When Ruth took the stand, time slowed. Ira guided her gently. "Please state your name for the record, Ruth Daniels. And what was your job on the night of June 9th? "I was the housemaid, event assistant, and server for the donor dinner." "Did you provoke Senator Bishop in any way?" "No." "Did you threaten him?" "No." "Did you steal anything?" "No, ma'am." "What happened after he slapped you?" "I fell. I hit the sideboard. Then I picked up the broken glass. I wiped the wine off the floor." "I didn't say anything." "I just did my job." "And why did you record that night?" "I wore the camera because I suspected illegal deductions in our paychecks. I never expected to capture that." "And why didn't you come forward sooner?" "Because people like me don't get believed. We get blamed or ignored or punished. But I had to show my son and myself that silence is no longer safety." When cross-examination came, Clay Wentworth tried to rattle her. "Miss Daniels, you've been described as stubborn by former co-workers. Isn't it true you once demanded your paycheck be corrected publicly?" "Yes, because it was wrong. And you never brought this up before?" "Because I was scared, but not anymore." "Why did you send the footage to a journalist instead of your employer?" "Because I wasn't looking for a settlement. I was looking for the truth, and now you're famous." "That must feel good." Ruth looked at him squarely. "I didn't want fame. I wanted to be treated like a human being." The courtroom held its breath. When closing arguments came, Amira didn't need to raise her voice. She simply said, "You saw what happened. You saw the hand, you saw the silence, you heard the truth. Don't let it go unheard again." The jury deliberated for 5 hours, and then they returned. The foreman stood, hands shaking. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Ruth Daniels." A gasp filled the room. "We award damages for emotional distress, defamation, unlawful termination, and punitive damages totaling $4.5 million. Someone in the back clapped before the judge called for order. Senator Bishop's face turned gray. Ruth sat motionless for a moment, as if unsure whether she had heard correctly. Amira grabbed her hand. Denise burst into tears. Marcus stood, frozen, then ran forward to wrap his arms around his mother. She held him tightly, whispering, "We did it, baby, we did it." Later that night, Ruth stood on the courthouse steps. Flashbulbs popped, reporters shouted her name, but she didn't speak. She simply looked up at the stars, the same ones her mother once prayed under, and smiled quietly. Not because she was rich now, not because she had won, but because she had been seen dead, and this time she hadn't disappeared after the slap. This time she had made history with it. After the verdict, the world changed. The morning after the verdict, Atlanta woke with a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of fear, not the hush of shame, but a silence that felt like the breath right before a song begins, full of possibility. Across the city, people whispered Ruth Daniels' name with pride. In barbershops, breakfast diners, and corner churches, they told her story like a sermon. She stood, they said, and the ground moved. Some still questioned it. Some still didn't understand it, but no one could ignore it now. The slap that once knocked her to the floor had become the moment that changed a conversation. And in households that looked like hers, poor, working class, mostly black, mostly invisible, a new phrase began to form. If Ruth can speak, maybe I can too. Ruth didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired. Her legs ached. Her voice was hoarse from the interviews. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with requests, offers, and praise. But amid all of that, she chose stillness. She stayed home for 2 days with Marcus, turning off the news, baking cornbread from scratch, and playing Scrabble on the kitchen table with laughter and cinnamon in the air. She answered only one call from Amira, who said gently, "You know this isn't the end. You've opened a door. People are waiting to walk through it." Ruth understood. She had become a symbol, but symbols don't sleep. Symbols get called into action. And she knew that resting was a gift, not an escape. So after 2 quiet days, she stood up, packed her purse, and got back to work. But this time, the work was something much bigger than cleaning houses. The first invitation came from the Georgia Labor Alliance. They asked her to speak at a statewide conference of workers' rights leaders. She accepted reluctantly. The room was filled with seasoned organizers, union heads, janitors, food service workers, teachers, and rideshare drivers. Some came with clipboards, some with calloused hands, but all of them came with ears wide open. When Ruth took the stage, the crowd rose to their feet. She wore a simple dress, no makeup, no fanfare. She didn't have a written speech. Just a story. "You don't need to be perfect to speak up," she told them. "You don't need to be rich. You don't need a degree. You just need to be tired enough of being stepped on. And brave enough to say, 'Not today.'" Her words weren't just heard. They were felt. Across the country, more maids, waitresses, retail clerks, hotel bellboys, nannies, they started coming forward. Some shared stories, some filed lawsuits. Some simply quit jobs that had broken them. The media dubbed it the Ruth effect. But Ruth didn't want her name to be a trend. She wanted it to be a lesson. So she launched something of her own, with Amira and a growing network of advocates, a foundation called Lift Her Up, dedicated to providing legal aid, trauma, counseling, and job support to workers in abusive environments. Not just maids, everyone, because, she said in an interview, if we only clean the surface, the stain stays underneath. Meanwhile, Franklin Bishop's world collapsed. The ethics committee stripped him of leadership roles. His donors pulled away. His re-election campaign was quietly dissolved. Eventually, he resigned from office. He blamed media bias, claimed he had been set up, but few listened. His name would forever be tied to one moment, and that moment didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to Ruth and the people who believed her. One afternoon, as fall crept into Georgia with crisp leaves and golden skies, Ruth returned to the Bishop mansion for the first time, not to work, but to walk past it. She stood on the opposite sidewalk, Marcus beside her. The tall iron gate was locked now. Weeds had started to grow along the edge. The house looked smaller than she remembered. "You ever think about what you'd say to him if he was standing there?" Marcus asked. Ruth didn't answer right away. She looked at the balcony where she used to sweep leaves every morning, the dining room window where her life had changed. "No," she said softly. "I've already said what needed to be said. Not to him, to the world." That night, back at home, she pulled out her notebook, the one that had carried her through the storm. So many pages now filled with scribbled thoughts, fears, plans. She turned to the last page and wrote slowly. Her hand steady. Day 6, I did not break. I became dot the next day. The mayor's office called. The city wanted to declare a new local observance, Worker Dignity Day, inspired by Ruth's case. She didn't cry when they told her. She just said, "Make sure it's not just a holiday. Make it mean something." And they promised to try. Months passed. And Ruth kept going, testifying before state legislatures, helping survivors, building her foundation, raising Marcus, laughing with her sister, and drinking tea on her front porch every Sunday morning with soft music playing in the background. She refused to let herself be defined by one slap, one courtroom win, or one moment of pain. Her life wasn't about what had been done to her. It was about what she had done with it. And though the world moved on, with new headlines and new tragedies in the quiet corners of back kitchens, laundry rooms, bus stops, and janitor closets, Ruth's name still moved like a whisper of hope. Women in uniforms looked at each other and said, "Remember Ruth?" She didn't stay down. Because Ruth Daniels, the black maid no one expected to rise, didn't just rise. She lifted others with her. And in the end, her story wasn't about a slap. It was about a stand.